Welcome back to Superliminal, and thank you for tuning in. And on today's show, I have had on a chap that I've been waiting such a long time to have on, the fascinating Guy Anderson, who wrote this brilliant book that I highly recommend. I know the focus is probably out. It's Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, which is a rather intriguing title. It's about the lost civilization, the lost technology, and the lost spirituality almost of the what I thought was the Tartarian civilization, but as Guy describes in the conversation, excuse me, it's the, if I've got this right, the lost millennium of the Christ and the Christ consciousness. Basically, incredible technology, harmonious technology that helps our well-being, our connection to ourselves, our healing, our longevity, our health, our relationship to the planet. Why that's been destroyed, the resets that have happened, the great resets, how that actually there's been 800 years taken from our timelines, so the Dark Ages actually didn't happen. And perhaps one of the biggest sacred cows is that Nikola Tesla possibly, probably didn't exist. I mean, oh, I'm such a Tesla fan, as is Guy, to be honest with you. So that's quite a thing to hear that. And at the very end, in fact, it was off camera, unfortunately. I wish we'd still been recording. I asked Guy, because I'd mentioned to him actually a question that I usually ask and I forgot to ask in this case because I was so into our conversation, was how do people take this information and apply it to their everyday lives? And he gave such a great answer, which is one of my favorite, which is switch off the television, switch off the news, be careful about what you put into your body, not just in terms of food, but what you put onto your body in terms of things like sunscreen, sun cream, lotions, and also I would add to that what you put into your body in terms of the things that you watch, the things that you take on board, getting distracted by conspiracies here, there, and everywhere, and realize that the so-called reset that's coming in 2030 is basically designed to wipe out so much of civilization unless we stand in our power and remember that we are sovereign beings who these people have no control over, because ultimately there are what, supposedly 8 billion of us and only a very tiny handful of them. And we've purposely been dissected and divided and subdivided ad infinitum to the point where we've been led to believe that we're merely useless eaters, as the lovely World Economic Forum would have us believe. But actually, nothing could be further from the truth. We are such powerful creator beings. But anyway, I shall leave it at that. It was such a good conversation after the last couple of episodes, which have been really deep and really heavy, beautiful all the same. This one was great, still deep, but very expansive. And the level of fascination with Guy's thoroughly researched and very well considered information is superb. So I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. So as always, please do subscribe, share, comment, and like to get the episode out to other wonderful people like you who could benefit from hearing the information, people who are awakening. For now, thanks ever so much for tuning in. Thank you to all my regulars for your constant support, the wonderful comments and feedback that I've had recently. And I will see you in a second. So hi everyone and welcome back to Superliminal. And today I have the fascinating Guy Anderson, who wrote a book that I've talked about in the introduction called Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids. I originally came across Guy through a mutual friend of ours, Elizabeth Hancock, who's also written a couple of fantastic books. But I've been very keen to get Guy on the show because Elizabeth introduced me to the idea of Tartaria, which I'd heard of, but wasn't 100% sure what it was and what it meant. I knew it referred to some kind of lost or ancient civilization. And since reading Guy's book, wow, what an eye opener! And there's also a channel on Instagram that we will doubtless cover later on that talks a lot about this. But anyway, let's get started. Guy, it's wonderful to have you on the show, and thank you for joining me on Superliminal.
Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, brilliant. So, usually, I start these conversations with a sort of potted history of the guest's background, because I know in the book you begin by sharing your experience of Freemasonry and how that informed your journey and your exposure to this eye-opening and illuminating information. So, yeah, perhaps you could give us a sort of potted version of the beginning and what led you to uncover this work.
Going right back to the start, I grew up in a house with a father that was obsessed with conspiracy theories. And I don't particularly like that term, but it's one that we've got, and it's one that I guess we're going to have to stick to. And it's the same with Tartaria as well. It's not really the correct term, but I think once these things have got a label or a blanket term, we need to kind of go with them. But my dad joined the Freemasons when I was a kid, and I used to want to know where he had gone, why he was carrying that briefcase, why nobody could look inside it, and why my mum kept saying that he was going to meet up with his friends, put his pinny on, and bake some cakes. And he always used to say the same thing when he left. He'd say, "You can laugh as much as you like, but we run the world." And I used to take it with a pinch of salt. And as I got older, I expressed a bit more interest. I started reading books that he had lying around. The first one was From Atlantis to the Sphinx. Then I started reading David Icke's work, and then I had an opportunity to join, but not a local lodge, at the Grand Lodge of the United Kingdom in London, in Great Queen Street, the headquarters. I got the opportunity to join there with some really key figures. And I wanted to know what my dad knew. I wanted to know how old the pyramids were, who built them. Was King Solomon real, or is this mythology? Who runs the world, and how do I get to meet these people? And 20 years after I joined, it must be clocking on for that actually. I realized that actually I was never going to find this information out, and all I watched, or all I witnessed really, were people using it to get promoted through the ranks in the police force. And the I learned a bit about King Solomon, but I didn't learn ultimately who's in control, who they report to. And then I discovered that the 33 degrees that I desperately wanted to climb the rung of to get to the 33rd level was never going to happen. And that after that there were 66 dark degrees, which are closed to people like me. And so I slowly disengaged. I stayed long enough to get my youngest son in because he wanted to join, and he experienced the very same thing. Although he did start to join an offshoot called the Knights Templar, which people probably will understand a bit about. Um, so I've always been interested in occulted history, and it was really that, I spent a lot of my time on BitChute over the years. But the pandemic for me was a time where I found that first of all, I wasn't going to be working for 9 months, so I was furloughed. Um, and I had up until that point, every time someone, I was a tattoo artist for years, and every time someone came to see me, I would put BitChute on my iPad on a stand and send them down a rabbit hole. And the more rabbit holes I went down, the more I started to unravel my own occulted history. Rather than relying on other people and hoping someone's going to share it with me, I just started doing more and more research myself. And I discovered Tartaria. And that was through somebody called Max Egan, who's put some brilliant work out there. And he was very outspoken in 2020, and he's had to actually leave Australia, where he's from, and go and live in a different country because of what he was subjected to for his views on what was going on. So he was my introduction to Tartaria. And then I stumbled across a CIA document. It was actually declassified in 1999. And it's all about the suppression of an empire and how it must be deleted and was from history. And that was a red rag to a bull. And so I spent 5 years digging and researching. And then I suppose ultimately I thought the only way I can get any sense of this is to write it down. And I want to pass this to my children and their children and anyone that's interested. And a couple of people said, well, why don't you get it published? Why don't you actually see if anybody wants to buy it? So I started a Facebook group and started talking about it on my little YouTube channel to see if there was any interest. And there was a lot more interest than I realized. I had no idea how many other people were looking into this. So the book was published last year, Tezza and the Cabbage Patch Kids. I chose the name specifically because it involves two parts of the Tartaria conspiracy. Yeah, that's the one. Because what people don't realize is that Tartaria isn't just an empire that was deleted. It involves lots of other things as well to do with Atlantean technology, repopulating with cloning, Nikola Tesla, the orphan train movement, world's fairs, and so on. There's a lot more to it. So I gave it a title that would appeal to people who didn't know what Tartaria was and would resonate with those that do. And so here we are, nearly a year after it was published, and people seem to be lapping it up. So really that's what happened. But every day I find out more information. So I could write another book to follow on from that about Tartaria, but actually the research I did what suggested that the chapter people were most interested in from that book was repopulation and cloning. So my sequel, Rise of the Clones, is a deeper dive into that element of our history. But now I am tempted because people keep asking me, saying, you obviously you've got so much more information now. Would you do a sequel to it?" But so I'm thinking about it. But that's my journey. It was a lifetime of Masonic interaction, occulted knowledge and history, and finding out about King Solomon, which I did think was mythology until I was shown things to prove that it wasn't. And then really, I suppose BitChute, a lot of reading, and BitChute was perhaps where I first heard about Tartaria and what propelled all of this, I guess. So that was probably a long-winded answer to your question.
Oh, it was a terrific answer. I love that. Because one of the things you mentioned before I asked the main question is you mentioned that Tartaria isn't exactly the accurate description. Tell us about that and what the accurate description is.
Right. Well, now this is a strange one because for many, many years I would classify myself as an atheist. I believed firmly in Darwin's theory of evolution until I researched it, and now I know that it's a crock. But I always did, and people often say to me, "You talk about Tartaria, but you're referring to the millennial reign of Christ." And I always used to think, "Oh my God, this person's God-fearing, and I'm not." And this isn't going to be a very good conversation because they're coming from a different place to me with a different mindset. And perhaps they were indoctrinated from childhood. Perhaps their parents forced them to church and they've been brought up in a very heavily religious family and so on. So I dismissed it until I started digging. The correct term is the millennial reign of Christ. It's a period of 1,000 years where everything is built in harmony and balance, that we resonate and the buildings resonate at 432 hertz, the same as all living matter and the earth itself. And they claim that these buildings were built by angels. These cathedrals, the star forts, these small cities we see called world fairs and expositions were built by the angels. Now that they don't mean people that came down with wings. They're talking about a different civilization. So where we get this millennial reign from is that our timeline's been altered. The current year is 1225. It's not 2025. They added 800 years. And Anatoly Fomenko, the Russian mathematician and scientist, and his peers researched this for a very long time. And I put some of his research into my first book, but I would recommend if anyone's interested, or if their ears have pricked up and thought, what's he talking about? I don't believe that for a moment. It's worth looking into it. Einstein, incidentally, before he died, said that he believed that our timeline had been altered more than once. and at least 800 years had been added, maybe 1,000. And they invented a period of time called the Dark Ages where nothing really took place. And so we've got this slow progression of evolution as we become more sophisticated and technologically advanced with regarding to the way in which we build and live. But it's actually more accurate to say we've gone backwards. So Jesus, born in 3 BC, which I know is strange in itself, but 3 BC, lives for 1,000 years. At 33 years old, he takes something similar to ayahuasca and experiences the death of his ego. There is no crucifixion, it's metaphorically written. And of course, the Bibles have all been bastardized and so much has been removed to give, I suppose, a very early book of laws and rules and ways to conduct your life before we had them. Um, so he lives for 1,000 years, and that's called the millennial reign of Christ. And when he died or disappeared in 1776, we entered New World Order, and America is perhaps the best documented example of that, with the back of the dollar bill showing you 1776 New World Order. It's there for everybody to see. We enter Satan's little season then, a period of time where these parasitic bloodline families are able to wreak havoc and destroy what the previous empire had established. We know who these families are. I'm sure everybody knows the Rothschilds. They go back to Amun Ra, who was Marduk, the Anunnaki, who, when he left, said that he was leaving everything, the world and everything on it, and all of its power and wealth, to the Ra-childs, to the children of Ra, the Ra-childs, and obviously the names slightly evolved over the years. So it was a 1,000 year period where we built in harmony, understanding cymatics and frequency and vibration. And Genghis Khan perhaps was the most well known of all of the rulers during this period. But Tartaria itself is a region of land, and to call the empire and the period of time Tartaria is a little bit inaccurate, because we are talking really about the northern hemisphere, mainly Russia, Eastern Europe, and Asia. But it's the philosophy and ethos of that culture that spun or went across the world, depending on whether you believe it's a spinning ball or a flat realm. And I'm on the fence with that because I haven't been into space yet to check, and I've not been able to cross any iced wall. Although I do lean towards that, I have to see things for myself really to before I can say, well, it's definitely flat. I don't know. I just don't know. I lean that way, but I don't know. I've got no way of knowing that yet. So I'm talking really about a period of time. Um, the other terminology for it is old world. So often we'll just say old world. If you're somewhere where you think people are going to worry that you might be about to start preaching from the Bible to them, then it's referred to as the old world instead. So it's an expanse of land that's become a blanket term for 1,000 years of living in a certain way and building that way too.
Yeah. Wow, that's so fascinating. And again, there's so much that we can deconstruct in that. But one of the things I wanted to pick up on there, Guy, was you mentioned the reset of 1776. Now, for anyone who watches this channel and for anyone who at least is half awake in terms of what's going on in the world and the reality, the nature of reality, rather, the true nature of reality. The word reset is something that most people will be familiar with most recently because of the psychopath Schwab, who, of course, is just a paid gopher for hidden forces. But Schwab has been talking, him and the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum have been talking about their um, reset in, I think, 2030. But you've uncovered, and I've seen, having read the book a couple of times, that actually this is not necessarily the first time that the world has faced a reset, which you have just touched upon. So, what can you tell us about the resets that have happened and how history, or his story, as we said off camera, has been rewritten? And I know that we do need to be careful about some of the terms that we use. But I've brought that up because I have had other guests mention it, and so far YT has deemed it safe for me to keep broadcasting.
Well, they use the word great. So the last great reset was 1776, and we're going through a great reset now. And that's been quite well publicized, as you said, by Darth Vader. He said numerous occasions. It's on their website. Charles Windsor has mentioned it numerous times. His dad, Phil the Greek, mentioned it too. So we know we're going through it. We know that 2020 was the beginning of it. And then we've got these various agendas that they want to push 21 and 30, where we've got 15-minute cities. We're looking now at 6G rollout, perhaps digital ID. Another situation like we had in 2020 is expected to be next year, respiratory again, but this time targeting children. The World Health Organization have full control in the event of an outbreak, following an agreement put in place at the back end of May, which takes a year to actually be enforced. So my guess is that May, spring next year into summer, we're going to see something significant and another pretend outbreak of something. But my guess would be connected to 6G or 5G, which I
Because of
think
the
will.
because of course of the being careful what words I use, the potential respiratory connotations
Mhm.
of that, which if anyone knows anything about the technology, becomes self-evident.
Yes, absolutely. So you've got this. They call it long. That I don't know if we can say the word, but you're suffering from long um,
Yeah.
flu. Um, so it's obviously linked to 5G currently, but we know we're going through that. We know that they're ramping up prices. The cost of living is going through the roof. They're trying to cripple us when we live in a world that's controlled by fiat currency. So that, any world bank can put a few zeros on their balance and no one's going to know, no one's going to care. It's not going to matter. So we know that when we pay our taxes, that actually that money doesn't really matter. It's insignificant. It's all about punishing, crippling us. And so when it's a great reset, they tend to remove the incumbent civilization. And so the Tartarian people, if you like, or people from the old world or previous civilization were removed in 1776. But it doesn't all happen overnight. It takes a long time to build up to that point, and then it carries on. So the civil wars were used, acts of genocide, the Napoleonic Wars, the American Civil War. There have been outbreaks as well. Around the similar time, there were earthquakes. The New Madrid quake in America was significant, mud floods everywhere. So they try and get everybody to kill themselves through civil wars while they sit back and watch. And in the Napoleonic Wars, people actually witnessed people wearing the same uniforms fighting each other and not realizing they were doing it. And then what you're left with are a lot of dead bodies, which we ate. The Napoleonic Wars, they were used for fertilizer for British crops. We used their teeth as dentures, Waterloo teeth, and we ate off their bones with bone china. So they recycle the bodies, and bits they can't end up in catacombs. So that's what tends to take place. The one prior to that, the Great Reset before that, when everybody became legally dead as a dead entity, where we come into this full caps sort of legal fiction, that was the Great Fire of London.
Yeah.
So when they use the word great, great actually means, and the reason you have great grandparents and great great grandparents is actually that technically refers to one generation of memory gone. So it dilutes. So so a great reset or a great war means that actually they're removing the memory of an entire generation of people. So the Great Fire of London in 1666, I said 800 years have been added to the timeline, but with regard to events, documents, and buildings, they just stick a one in front of it. So the Great Fire of London was 666, and that is when the Vatican classified internationally every person on the planet to be technically and legally dead. That's when that took place. So that was the beginning. And it's the Jesuits, formerly they were the Phoenicians, that have done this and still do it today. That's ultimately who controls all of this. Pepe Orsini, the great Pope at the Vatican, is the man responsible really for all of these think tanks, Trilateral Commission and World Economic Forum and so on. But what's above him, what it is, who they are, how many of them are there, what they look like, can they be seen by us? I don't know. There's lots of theories on that. So with the Tartarian Empire gone, 1776, and the civil wars that took place, you were left with a lot of dead bodies, a lot of dead men, millions of dead men. So they introduced the Lunacy Act, and that meant that if you were a widow, you were considered insane. Having your husband fall in battle was grounds to be committed to an asylum or an institution. If you had children, they became property of the state. They repopulated using people's children that were technically stolen from them across the world and shipped them to key areas to rebuild the infrastructure, whether it was mining, working in fields and factories, the boom of the Industrial Revolution, all the images you'll see, there's no adults, they're all kids. Where are the adults? Why aren't they at work? So it's very well thought out because these kids start out life not really knowing much about their past, being too young to remember very much about what was shared with them, perhaps with their parents. So you've got a blank sheet, a new set of history books, a new person in charge, and away you go. So that tends to be how you do it. But there are smaller resets along the way. So World War One was a reset, 9/11 was a reset. These are all resets that take place. But right now we are going through what will ultimately be a mass culling
Yeah,
again.
because the general consensus, because after the thing that happened around about 2020 21 with a certain intervention,
Mm,
um, is that, and the one that you said will likely come about next year, even though that it's now publicly been proven that they are so dangerous to human health, but they're still somehow still promoting this thing, is that one of the key things behind that, I mean, these things are always very multi-layered, and there's no like just one reason for it. But one of the key elements behind that was for the people whose physiology wouldn't be able to accommodate the said thing that happened, is was exactly that, to get the global population down to about half a billion, which does seem to be, you look at different pockets of research, and people generally who do it like yourself, who've done a deep dive into this, seem to be saying the same thing. Although it has got me wondering, like, given perhaps this is why technical intelligence, artificial intelligence, and the mechanization, the automation of everything, it always made me wonder, well, surely they would need a certain amount of people, much more than that half a billion figure, to be able to run the businesses and the industries that they run. But perhaps this is one of the reasons why we're seeing a huge splurge of TI AI to replace those people that would have traditionally done those jobs. Well, what do you think about that?
yeah, you're exactly right. Before they've used children, it's always been children that
Yeah.
have been used to repopulate and get the infrastructure and civilization back up and running. But as you know, like from my last chapter, it my theory is now that they've got AI to a point where, and of course we're all using it, so we're making it better. We're improving Chat GPT by going on there and talking to it and using it. So many people think that it's fantastic. Look at the evolution with AI. Isn't this brilliant? But I just think you need to watch Terminator again. You've got no
Yeah.
idea, or just watch, 1984, or read it. Not that many people read. It's becoming a dying art. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, they're going to wipe us out this time. Well, obviously they're going to try to, and we know how. We know what's in the medical intervention. People are still queuing up to get it done, which I find very strange. But it's so heavily suppressed. But what's interesting, last time they did a great reset in 1776. Between 1776 and 1876, 3.35 billion people died.
Wow.
Now, considering the population was 770 million in 1776, and they still doubled it within 100 years, it had risen to 1.3 billion. So they'd not only doubled the world population, but killed nearly three times it as well. And that's all genocide, war, and
Yeah.
disease, famine, and so on. So that's an incredible number of people. I mean, even today, the dent that would make would be incredible. So I think we're probably they're spoiling for war, aren't they? So we know that there are things coming, and we know that it's going to become harder to get food as well. We're going to lean towards GMO, and we're going to lean towards perhaps fake and synthetic meats and so on. So I think it's coming from all angles this time. They've got the technology
Mm.
scientifically. I mean, we've gone backwards really with regard to real technology. But the technology that we have, this sort of artificial intelligence and this need for homogenizing everyone and everything, is probably going to be what ultimately causes people to become seriously ill.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. And it's interesting you saying that, Guy, about the AI TI situation. My last published guest on the podcast, a fascinating lady called Erica Amarina, who was deep into the secret space programs and had been abducted 1,000 times in the by the military and the grey ETs. Um, she can't shout loudly enough about staying off AI and Chat GPT and just how dangerous it is, because she said what people don't realize is that there's a much older, more ancient AI, TI, that's been around in our galaxy and probably even the universe for millions of years, probably,
Yeah.
if not longer, that's plugging directly into the AI that's now coming out on the surface here. And she says what people can't see because they don't have the vision to see anymore in terms of sight beyond sight. So, we had so many back in the millennia of Christ era where people's extrasensory capabilities were so much more prevalent because they weren't being distracted, they weren't being marginalized, they weren't being poisoned electromagnetically via the food, via stress, via emotion and everything. It's like people could see the unseen. So in other words, energy and entities that were outside of physical sight. But she said if you could see that, and I've heard other people who are psychic healers say the same. He says that actually you can see the dark tentacles of that connecting with the AI that we use on this planet, and it's literally, so for some people you could almost literally see it come out. Because I know sometimes when I'm on my screen, or whether it's the laptop or the phone, which I do try and minimize, sometimes I literally can feel an energetic force connecting with me, like literally draining me, and I have to put it down after a while. So I do completely agree with that. But of course, we've been steered in a direction where people have been told it's the next big thing. If you like in my leadership coaching business and in my partner's business in executive recruitment, it's the message coming from everywhere is if you don't do this, you're going to get left behind, you'll be out of business, and so on and so on, to draw people ever more into that. And inevitably, for the people who aren't awake or aware enough of their own sovereignty on a soul level, is to connect them into that transhuman way of being. Because, yeah, as you say, people need to watch Terminator or Space Odyssey 2001, or read Orwell's book again and actually see what's going on, because we're literally sleepwalking
Yeah.
um, into this dystopian future. We're well on the way there. Anyway, which begs a question for me about, we've talked about these so-called elite, so-called, who are really parasites because they can't create for themselves. They have to parasite off our creativity and our resourcefulness and our ingenuity. What's your knowledge and understanding about the history of these elites and where they come from, and how we've got to a position in our society where they, on paper at least, or on the surface, seem to be ruling the show, even though there's a tiny handful of them and billions of us?
Well, it goes back to the Anunnaki and Marduk, who I mentioned earlier on, Amun Ra.
Yeah.
Marduk said that he was leaving everything to his children, the Ra childs, the children of Ra, the Ra Khan. Um, and this is quite well documented to the point where if people want to know a little bit more, I mean, Marduk is his real name, but in Egyptian history, he's called Amun Ra. And if people want to jump on Google and type in, when I say Amen, when I pray or go to church, who am I talking to? Who is this to? What am I really saying? It will tell you there in black and white that you're saying thank you to Amun Ra. So everything has been designed for us to remain obedient and to serve Amun Ra, the Anunnaki, Marduk. His children and their descendants have infiltrated every single organization and government in the world. Rockefeller was very clear about this. J.D. Rockefeller stated that he believed that there was a conspiracy out there that certain families, bloodline families, were in control of everything that happens, whether it's banking, politics, or actually who sits on a throne. And that there is a theory that there's this secret cabal in place of people that descend from the Anunnaki. And he actually said, if that is the charge I am being faced with, then I plead guilty, and I'm proud of it. Rothschild, Jacob Rothschild said he didn't care who sits on the throne as long as he's in control of the bank. And so they were put in positions of power right from the very beginning. But the deal was when they were originally the Phoenicians, they started banking, maritime law, admiralty law. This is all them. The invention, if you like, of the passport. This is the Phoenicians. So all of these elements and levels of control were put in place by them, and they morphed into the Jesuits. And the deal was that they would allow 1,000 years of peace and harmony, and then they wanted their turn. And if their turn wasn't given, then they would wipe the planet out again. So we'd experience something very similar to the Younger Dryas period, or in biblical terms, the story of the Great Flood, which actually goes back to the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's the Bible's just an adaptation of a much older story. The Epic of Gilgamesh is our first version of a Bible, the first that exists. It doesn't matter whether you're reading the Torah, the Quran, or the King James Bible. It's all based upon the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is substantially older. And so that was the deal. They've got the technology. It was passed down to them, and 250 years ago, almost, they were given the opportunity to set Lucifer free. Although that's a very that's not actually quite the right person to be using as an example, but that particular name, or that being, if you like, has been given a bit of a bad rap because they were considered to be the morning star, as was Jesus, and they were sharing light and good. And anyway, the Statue of Liberty represents that in 1776 the chains of Lucifer were set free and we enter Satan's little season. So 250-year period where these powerful families can introduce things like pornography, ramp up alcoholism, and then slowly, gambling and so on. So poisoning us because they enjoy it. They take an incredible amount of pleasure from removing our energy from us because that's what they need. And that's when the legal system was introduced to a point where we are charged and placed inside a cell so they can remove more energy. So really, we are talking about these, as you said earlier on, these parasitic families that don't just live off our money because they don't need it anymore. They live actually off our life force, our energy itself. But the deal was you've got 250 years at this, and then Jesus will return, or at least the saints will return, or that way of living will return. Some people think that actually what happened in 2020 was to see who is ready and able to go into that next phase, and that actually it was designed to remove the people that weren't, so we don't take any luggage with us, because not everyone can expand their consciousness, enter a higher level of consciousness, and perhaps a slightly different dimension. So that's really where we are now. But my gut was that when I started looking into this, that the 4th of July next year was going to be a very significant moment in time. So that's really where we are. So it's the same people. Their position of power it goes back a very, very long time. They've caused um, complete resets before, and they had no choice. If they weren't given this period of time to do all of this harm, then they would cause a catastrophic event across the world. And so that was really the deal that they were given.
Yeah, and I love that point you raised there about what happened around about 2020, really being an inflection point to
Mm.
for people to wake up, because you'll have come across the Hopi tribe and their prophecy that there's a timeline split. One timeline goes along and eventually goes down and literally just stops, and that's the transhumanist agenda and the AI and technology agenda. And the other one is the one where we remember who we are, we reconnect with ourselves, we reconnect with our planet, we reconnect with the deeper levels of our consciousness and our souls and integrate back into unity, and remember that we're immortal creator beings and not just human beings having a physical human experience, and we have to merge with technology. Because the interesting thing is, people who've had near death experiences, so many, and there are millions and millions and millions of them, that you see this one of the same threads you see every single time is that they know everything about everything instantly, any piece of information they need to know. And that's because their level of awareness has their frequency has raised way beyond the level of frequency that we need to be in these 3D bodies. And it for me, it just goes to show why AI, TI is actually a complete misdirection, where we are being made to feel inferior to it. Therefore, we have to merge with it, which of course is the smoke screen, sell the sizzle, and actually the real the real reason is what's beneath that to bring us into that transhumanist agenda. But actually, it turns out, and has always been the case, which would have been the case in that 1,000 years, and even before then, before the Anunnaki arrived and started interfering with the human form, that actually we've been able to access all the information about all that is anyway, if only we would go inside and reconnect with ourselves. And that that's a lovely little segue into one of the questions I wanted to ask you about Jorg Fassbinder and Gilgamesh, because there was a conversation, what was their relationship and their significance, particularly in terms of giants, and then the relationship to the Iraq War and the technology that was there, that was perhaps one of the reasons that that happened, and not for a pea shooter weapon of mass destruction that was turns out was a fabrication.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. And interestingly, somebody I know was very high up in the American military and was security at the site where the tomb was found.
Oh.
Witnessed it being destroyed after they'd removed certain things. So they removed what they needed to. They got him out, various other things. Some people claim, and he didn't see this, but some people claim there was a Stargate found as
Mm.
well. But he never saw that, but he did watch the body being flown out on a helicopter. So he was there, and then shortly after that, the place was flattened. It was the first actual place to be hit, because they do need to obviously destroy the evidence of this, because the last thing they want us to know is the truth. They get to keep it for themselves, don't they? So Gilgamesh would be perhaps remembered best as being a descendant from the original Anunnaki. So we're talking about people like Enki and Enlil and Anu. So he was half Anunnaki and half us. What we were created to be, the Homo sapien designed to mine gold and be subservient with this brilliant obey gene and a capped lifespan, and with painful childbirth so we don't overpopulate. So he and other people like him were put in charge originally because they had the same kind of, I suppose, outlook, the same fascination with gold as well. King Solomon was another one, but they were people that were direct descendants of the Anunnaki, with a little bit of us too, half and half, they estimate. But there were people called the Agigi. who had
Yeah.
previously been doing the mining. Now, their offspring, when they mated with the Homo sapien, were people like the two-headed giant, the Cyclops, the Banshee. That is where they came from. That went horribly wrong, and they created what we would call monsters. Although in Black's law, we're technically classed as monsters.
Yeah.
But Gilgamesh would be the very first ruler, I suppose. But actually, he's considered to be the first Tartarian king. But before that, it actually goes back to Magog.
Yeah.
Magog and Gog. And Japhet. So one became the beginning of the Celts. One became the ethos, if you like, of the Tartarian people. But Gilgamesh is the first ruler that actually was in charge of that. Then after him, you've got King Solomon, and then obviously there's lots of others along the way, but the more well-known ones would be ultimately Genghis Khan in the end, and then Queen Jenapil, who Padme from Star Wars is based upon. She was killed during the
Wow.
Second World War by the Russians. If anybody wants to take a look, if they go onto Google and just type in Queen Genepil, Genepil, have a look at her and then have a look at Padme in Star Wars, and it's the same person, but she was the last queen, and the Russians shot her in the back, I think in 1943, while she was pregnant, and that was it. That bloodline gone. So, but Gilgamesh, yeah, we know red-headed giant, credible. I mean, people suggest around 12 feet tall. That wasn't unusual, and that
No,
suggests these doorways, doesn't it? The huge doorways we see on some of these buildings.
absolutely, yeah. Because in I was watching a show, the historian Freddie Silver, and I think
No,
Regina.
Freddie.
Yeah, yeah, I do like Freddie, and he was with Regina Meredith. They were doing something for Gaia TV, and I can't remember who the other person was, but they were in Sardinia looking at the graves
Mm,
of giants and
yeah.
investigating that and what the history of that was, and it was fascinating. And then, of course, all across North America as well, there are loads and loads and loads of graves of giants who are anything from 12 to 40 feet tall, who then the Smithsonian Institute then sort of dived in and said, oh, we've got to give these back to the indigenous people. And somehow these, even though there's photographic evidence, all of these remains seem to have magically disappeared somehow. I wonder why.
Yeah, I mean the Smithsonians have done an incredible job of hiding as much as they can. The only thing they've ever been honest about, to a degree, are the star forts. But yeah, there are cases of giants being found everywhere. I mean, the biblical story of Noah, if people take a look into that, I mean, he was claimed to be something like 60 feet tall. So we know people were a lot taller. We know plantation, vegetation, and most living things were a lot taller and bigger. And we know that that's due to there being a higher level of oxygen in the atmosphere, and that was reduced. And then obviously they've spiked the energy grid or ley lines, and caused an incredible amount of damage. So we've been stifled, I guess. But the story of giants it is something that we're supposed to consider as being mythology, but it's not. As you said, the skeletons that the Smithsonians have taken are incredible, thousands of them. And they always say the same thing that they've lost them, they never had them, or they're in a building that has an asbestos issue, so they can't access them. And they keep repeating the same old lies. But I included in that book a story about the Solomon Islands and the girl that was taken away by the giants and then came back with one. So we know that they existed. We know that they were part of the old world, hence the size of the buildings. But like with most things, they invent a backstory for it, or it's a fairy tale or a fantasy. A little bit like we mustn't believe in dragons, but we must believe in the story of dinosaurs, where they show us a Tyrannosaurus Rex with these pathetic little arms that are clearly wings put on the front to give us a backstory. So I think that that's what they've done. It's just brainwashing, isn't it?
Yeah, completely. And unfortunately, most people don't have the sense to actually look up and think, well, hang on a minute, how can this be the case? But thankfully, people like you who are doing the research, and Elizabeth and many others, are finally giving the wider world an opportunity to see. Because I remember saying to Elizabeth in one of the conversations that we had on the podcast last year was, just how difficult it must be to actually, especially online, to find research that isn't just a curated newsfeed, because obviously these days it absolutely is, and so much of it is hidden. So, I do think it's incredible that people like you and her and many others can actually find this information. But one thing I wanted to circle back to, Guy, was we touched briefly on the Stargate technology that was in Iraq, and of course there are Stargates all over the world. A lot of them are operational. There are Stargates in some of the deep underground military bases that secret space program insiders have openly talked about. But what were some of the key Tartarian technologies that have been, I say, lost, but obviously intentionally disappeared? And what can you tell us about those and their effect on the world, both in terms of what could have been and what's been lost?
Perhaps the most significant would be energy being harnessed from the ether. That's the most significant of all. And this isn't a new thing. We know now that that's really what the pyramids were doing. And we know that the pyramids are perhaps a lot older than we've been led to believe. And I would argue that this is Atlantean technology, perhaps even older. I used to say that Tartaria is an echo of Atlantis, but actually, because it was really the northern hemisphere, it's probably an echo of Hyperborea, and that would be a more accurate description. So, harnessing energy from the ether, understanding that there is energy and that we are on a massive circuit board, and once you know how to harness that using a cathedral, a cathode row, then you can harness that energy. And the energy was stored in copper tanks filled with red mercury, and that was used to power cities. Um, Perhaps the best example of how you can harness energy to create an incredible amount of voltage is displayed in a film that everybody will know. And there's a typical Greco-Roman or Tartarian building that during a lightning strike generates enough electricity to send someone called Marty McFly back to the future. And that's perhaps the best example you can see of the power potential and how to harness it. And that's what they did. But Rockefeller was not going to have that. We've got the Industrial Revolution coming, the Standard Oil Company. There was money to be made, so he outlawed that any research into that. He outlawed electric vehicles. They weren't banned, but he actually made it impossible for people to be able to charge. The charging stations were removed. The companies that manufactured electric vehicles were targeted. The police department in New York and the postal service that were using electric vehicles and scooters were given petrol vehicles. And so, through a series of very clever moves, we remove the energy from the ether. The ether is removed as being one of the elements. It was the fifth element. It's removed. It goes from an actual scientific element to being a myth. And this was again Rockefeller and his cousins and so on that did that. So harnessing energy from the ether, which Nikola Tesla dedicated his life to trying to re-engineer and achieve, was perhaps the most significant thing. Free power to everybody wherever they live.
Yeah, and I love that you brought Tesla up because that was something that I was going to ask you about because for many, and myself included, Nikola Tesla's almost like deific, like a supernatural human, which you could argue that he probably was a Pleiadian or a Venusian that happened to come and have an incarnation here. But I know that you have and others who have done similar research have a slightly different view about what Tesla's research was. And it might upset some people, but we don't care because we're only interested in the truth here. So tell us your thoughts on Tesla and actually what he was doing.
Yeah, so this is an issue that I've had with several people, and I've been sort of attacked for my views on it. But obviously, we know why people do things like that. It's not necessarily a reflection of me; it's more a reflection of them. Um,
Absolutely.
And to quote Marcus Aurelius, I will start by saying all I know for certain is I know nothing at all. But I've spoken to Tesla's museum, and I've spoken to researchers there, people that have been working there for a very, very long time, and I've asked if they can put me in touch with any living descendants. Well, you know his brother died, but we know his sisters didn't. So there must be kids out there that had kids and so on. They couldn't find anybody, and then someone reached out to me and claimed to be the great niece of Nikola Tesla. I asked if they could share any stories or photographs or anything like that. And they said they would. And then I pushed and I pushed and I pushed and I pushed. And they came back and said, Donald Trump has said they're not allowed to talk to me anymore. So my guess was they were highly medicated.
Right.
Yeah, this person was nuts. I don't think for one moment they are who they say they are. So
Right.
where I'm going with this is that I also asked if we consider Nikola Tesla to be a pioneer of technology, that was paid to talk publicly, paid to attend dinner parties and give lectures, that was never out of the news, apparently. Why isn't there any video footage of him anywhere in the world? And the only answer I can think of is because he didn't exist. I think he's another Napoleon or Shakespeare. I think, and I don't know, but that I can't help thinking it. So I'm not saying I know for sure. I hope he did exist. I really do. But I've studied him for a very long time, and no living descendants, no video footage. It's just a little bit strange. And the only answer I got from someone at the museum was that he might have been camera shy. And I said, well, that's weird. This is the guy that's always in the paper and being paid to attend dinner parties and give lectures. Um, it doesn't come across as being very shy. I've got a photograph of him on the beach wearing a very skimpy swimming costume with a young lady. I mean, this is the
Yeah.
same person we're talking about, is it? But yeah, I mean, if what he says is true, he was being communicated to via by the Venetians. Everything came in visions where he almost blacked out to the point where he didn't know what was real and what wasn't anymore. Um, but there are lots of anomalies. Two van loads of files taken from his hotel room. Well, one of his hotel rooms, one was an office, one was where he actually lived. Um,
Yeah.
but this was two van loads of files taken. Apparently, they had to crack the safe to get them. So if it takes two vans to fill the files, then how did they manage to get them all in a safe to start with? I don't understand that. That doesn't really stack up. And also, he said he never wrote anything down. So I don't know what the whole thing's a little bit messy. But as I said, I really do hope he existed because if he did and the story's true, then all he ever wanted to do was give the world energy for nothing, to make sure no matter where you lived, you had energy.
So who do we think the person in the photographs is then?
I don't know, but a lot of people believe it's Frank Zappa, and the photographs have been staged to look a lot older.
Right.
Whatever
Okay.
you do, don't look online because you'll end up where I am now.
Down a massive rabbit hole.
No, I mean you'll just see Frank Zappa.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, you will. And
Yeah.
then if you are a Tesla fan, it will just dent it a little bit more. As I said, I am a fan of Nikola Tesla, but the surname's unusual. It means steel. You know, it's an anagram of steel. The no living descendants, the two van loads of paperwork when he never wrote anything down, no video footage. It's all a little bit weird. And then someone actually sent me an anonymous email, and it was an email address that by anonymous, I mean it was just a series of numbers at something, and no name or anything. And they said check Frank Zappa, and uh, and sent me a link to and a photo of him just on Google at a side profile. And I never heard from them again. And as soon as I saw it, I went down another rabbit hole and I started talking to people that said, "Stop banging on about Frank Zappa. I thought you'd done your research on Tesla."
Oh, see now I'm itching after our conversation. I'm itching to go and have a look.
Yeah, it
But
will
at the
ruin
same,
it for you. It's like
but
when
at
I
the
found
same,
out. Sorry.
yeah, but at the same time, I'm going to go through exactly what you went through. But hey, as I just said a few moments ago, all we're interested here on Superliminal Podcast is the truth. So, Guy, we're coming towards the end of our conversation. I mean, I could literally question you for hours and hours because this is so fascinating, and clearly the the depth and the quality of the research you've done is without question. But one of the things I wanted to close off on is the chapter in the book about whitewashing, which I particularly liked, and the world fairs, because there's as you know, I think his name's Jacob, the guy who runs I Am the Improbable Dreamer, the Instagram page has some fascinating photos and videos there, particularly of the old buildings from the World Fairs.
Mm.
So what was going on with that? Because supposedly these buildings were knocked up in a year to 2 years and then instantly destroyed. And you can see from some of the old photographs that there's loads of weathering on them as well. So tell us about that in terms of what you've uncovered.
Yeah, so basically, these were Tartarian cities. Now, again, I'm using that word incorrectly. I'm saying Tartaria, but if we just go with it as a blanket term, these were Tartarian cities, and they were repurposed. So what they did was they whitewashed them. They painted them white, and that disguised the age of them. Now you can find some images online, and I've got quite a few that actually show them before they were painted. And there's debris everywhere, detritus, and they are showing signs of severe weathering. I've got lots of images like that, and if anybody's interested, they can always reach out, and I can send them what I've got. But what they decided to do was claim that these buildings, and they were all remote, they were all in remote locations. So you might think, wow, the Chicago World's Fair, so many people must have seen this. No, there was nobody living in that area, and they'd got rid of most of the people anyway. And anybody wondering what was going on had already been incarcerated or committed. So they repainted them white, and that's why you won't find construction photos. And if you do find any, there'll have been people adapting or repairing, or they'll be falsified. Some that are out there showing scaffolding. If you zoom in, the scaffolding's matchsticks. They're actually matchsticks, and they've been superimposed onto the photo by what they used to call photo layering, Victorian photoshopping. And so what they decided to do was mass brainwash and whitewash. So they whitewashed the buildings, and the idea was to say, look at what we can achieve. This is the British Empire, and Charles Dickens actually wrote an article about this. This is a flex of muscle for the British Empire to say, all across the world, look at what we, the Caucasian people, are capable of. But actually, the buildings were built by people who were not Caucasian. They've whitewashed all of that, and a lot of these events had indigenous people on, labeled as savages in human zoos on display. So it was an opportunity to show the world, look at what we can build in less than a year. Look at the technology on display here, all by Caucasian people. Um, and it was kind of a brainwashing exercise, really, to rewrite history. But a lot of people started questioning these buildings. Hold on a moment. You did all of this, acres of Greco-Roman buildings and canals and these incredible temples and palaces, just for an exhibition that nobody really went to, because that's all fictitious, the numbers of people, because there was nowhere to stay. There weren't even toilets there. Um, look at what we can do within 9 months. But once people started questioning it, they knew that it had a lifespan. So all of them were either demolished or had accidental fires. And some of them are actually bizarre. Some were built from glass, crystal palaces, built within 9 months. Crystal Palace in London, 264,000 panes of glass, all shipped by a barge from Birmingham to London. Yeah. They didn't even have the capability to do this. So what you could do is look at a World's Fair, pick any. The Chicago's probably a good one. Look at how many people lived in the area. Look at how many skilled craftsmen and stonemason there were available at the time. Bear in mind there were buildings going on all over the world at exactly the same point. Where did they get the workforce from? Where did they get the materials from? The actual stone itself, where did that come from? Because there's no records of any of it. And then they burnt them all at the end because people were asking too many questions. Nobody remembered them being built. Nobody knew anyone who worked on them unless they were actually tidying them up. And some of them were won. The contract to be an architect to design a World's Fair, some of these were won in competitions. You'll find all of the World's Fairs, whichever one you pick, would have been designed by someone who'd never designed anything like it before and never did ever again. And that's all falsified too. So it was a British Empire flex of muscle to introduce new technology, really to align with the Industrial Revolution and then the beginning of electricity and how things could save time and become more efficient by really reversed engineered technology, antiquitech from the previous civilization. So that's what, whenever anybody ever asks me about the world's fairs, I call it whitewashed and brainwashed.
Honestly, guys, it's been such a fascinating conversation about some of this stuff, and I know we've only just touched on the surface. So, for anybody listening, I will put the link to Guy's book and his contact details on there because honestly, once you start getting into this stuff, it's just you just cannot stop investigating because it really is the untold true history or at least what remains of it and what we can uncover about our genuine past, not the history that's been written. But to close off, Guy, before we sort of jump onto the final three questions, where is what direction is your research taking you in next?
It takes me in different directions all the time, and I really the World's Fairs is something that I intend to write about in chronological order because I've got an awful lot of information, and each one you can pick apart the narrative, and people find that quite interesting. But I've just stopped doing that because I post every day on Facebook, and each day I put a different conspiracy theory up there with my views on it, and these have become really, really popular. And so several people have asked me if I would compile them into a book. So the A to Z of conspiracy theories is what I'm actually working on at the moment. But the majority of them link to Tartaria and associated rabbit holes within that warren. But yeah, the other thing that I've been thinking about doing is actually writing a book based upon a fictitious book, a novel based upon someone who lived during the time of the reset, who actually experienced what happened and airships, direct energy weapons, the grid being spiked, his giant friends being killed, people hiding in Earth and disappearing. And so I have been thinking about doing that, and the name of the character is an anagram of Nikola Tesla.
Uh, I can't wait for that one to come out. I would love to read that. So yeah, you heard it here first that that's going to be one of the
Yeah.
major books for forthcoming. I love that. So, Guy, to finish off, the three questions that I love to ask almost every guest. Occasionally, I do forget. So, the first one is, what are you most excited about right now?
God, that's hard. I don't know how to answer that. It depends what you mean. If you mean generally, then it's my youngest son getting married at the end of the year.
Perfect. It's whatever comes to mind. So I love that. That's just the perfect answer. So congratulations to him and his bride to be. Second question. Imagine you just jumped into a time machine, very relevant given everything that we've been discussing, and you feel yourself moving in time. Then it stops, the doors open, and there's 12-year-old Guy stood in front of you. What one piece of advice would you give that young boy?
God, I would like to think more than one piece of advice, but I suppose um, slow down,
Mm.
slow
It's a
down.
be it's a beautiful
Mm.
one. And finally, what's the number one thing wrong with the world right now? And what one thing would you do to solve it?
I'd remove the internet. That's it.
Brilliant.
I
Yeah.
mean, look at the
And
problems you could remove.
yeah. And you're not the first person who said that. So I think that people in general, we should start listening to that. Because going back to what we were discussing earlier in the conversation about our capability to access information, our inbuilt from birth capacity for telepathy with not just each other, but with the realm, with animals, with the planet, with trees. I think that's a very, very, very powerful answer to that. So, Guy, it's been so great talking to you. I've been looking forward to this for so long. I know it's been a long time coming. Before we close off, where can people, what can people connect with you in terms of what you're
Yeah.
doing? Where can people find you?
The best place, the easiest place, so you haven't got to write loads of different things down if you're listening and want to connect with me, is to go on my website because there are links to Facebook, links to YouTube on there, and you can contact me directly. And it's called the Tartarian Empire.co.uk.
Brilliant. And I will put all those on the show notes as well, including an Amazon link or a link to, actually no, you sell it through the website as well, do you? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, they can buy them on Amazon, but obviously then get signed copies directly from me.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, I'll put that on there as well. So, for everyone listening, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. This is right down my street. I could sit and talk about this till the cows come home. Thank you again for joining us on Superliminal. And as always, please do subscribe, share this episode, comment, and like because it helps the algorithm get the information out to other great people like you who are open to hearing it. And of course, Guy, thanks ever so much for coming on Superliminal. I've loved this so much. It's been such a good conversation and a real honor to have you in the hot seat. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed it. I hope to come back on again.
Yeah, I would love that. So yeah, let's make a point of that at some point in the future, especially when that novel gets written. But hopefully, we'll see you before then. So yeah, bye everyone. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next episode. Bye for now.